This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, Bricks Masons delivers quality and craftsmanship that truly stands out. Shop now at bricksmasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. And now your host, Worshipful Brother, Michael Arce.
Welcome back. You've joined us for an episode on the history of California and Freemasonry as we welcome in Brother Adam Kendall. And most of us may know Adam as a California-based historian and Freemason, and he's here to guide us through kind of the rise of Freemasonry from the gold rush, the powerful figures that followed, to the whispers of violence that kind of still haunt the legacy of California. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, Brother Adam.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our listener can't see, but just for you, I busted out my San Francisco t-shirt, so very excited to get into this. A lot of us kind of think of California as like this warm, sunny Hollywood destination, and that's what California could be now, but it certainly isn't how California started in the past.
Well, I have to say it's been known for its natural beauty for a very long time, which is why it attracted so many. During the Spanish conquest, they didn't really get up towards my neck of the woods, which is in Northern California. They first came to Baja, and in fact, at one point, it was believed that it was an island. They started to figure out why they needed to be all over California and to protect it for their own interests because of the 7 Years' War. And of course, the information I'm getting is not from hard research. This is what is already in the history books. So the Spanish had California, and then when Mexico gained independence, 1821 off the top of my head, and an entire new society sprang up because, of course, the capital of Mexico is in Mexico City. California is pretty far away. And this was a very brief period where you had a very unique culture within California. You had the rancheros, the vaqueros, you had the mission system was dismantled. And although the people, the Native Americans that were working on the mission, they were no longer indentured servants, but they kind of stayed that way because they had nowhere else to go. But it was an entirely different type of society. And then the Americans came. And then all of this changes, of course, in 1848 with the discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill. And this really accelerates the evolution of a modern state, really.
I am a third-generation Californian. I was born and raised in San Diego, but then my family moved to Arizona when I was about 9 years old. In Arizona, we get I think it's in your high school, you have to take the history of Arizona as one of the history classes. And similar, you hear a lot about, the war with Spain. There was a lot of Native American presence, obviously, in Arizona. But you starting to tell the story of kind of the origin story of California, at least with what we know from the American point of view, it's interesting because California was on the map. It was a territory. Who are these original 49ers? And what do you know Masonically about Freemasons that would have come to California from other parts of the country or even the world with the hopes and dreams that everybody did then to strike it rich and find their gold nugget?
Prior to that, you had John Fremont. He had been supposedly looking for the source of a river, and he said that he was going to go up to Oregon. The Mexican authorities were always very kind of suspicious of Americans hanging out because why are you here? Ironically, you had to have papers to be in California, right? And if you didn't, they'd want to check you out. So he was basically there to serve American interests and probably also his own. And he planted the American flag, probably raised some ire, and then he fomented the Bear Flag Revolt, which was a strange bedfellows of a ragtag group of Americans, some Mexican vaqueros, etc. One of the early settlers, there were several around that happened to be Masons. Robert Semple had described them, and this is also in the history books. You can check that they were some of the roughest crowd he's seen. And they had basically become disgruntled with the Mexican government that they weren't being given, afforded any rights or benefits. And so they took the garrison at Sonoma and hoisted their own flag of the California Republic. It didn't say that on there, but it was the bear flag. Took General Mariano Vallejo, or Vallejo, hostage. So Fremont foments this sort of revolution. Of course, there were Masons that were in and around the area, however, not very well organized. George Yount was a Mason. I mentioned Robert Semple during the Bear Flag Revolt. He became a Mason. William Ide, I believe, and several others. Sutter had applied, I had heard. This could be hearsay, but I don't think he was rejected, but it was advised he didn't. So he's one of those crazy characters that California has attracted over the years. But I would argue they've all come from other states. So,
I did have a question about the Masons at that time, because you make a really valid point. At this point, California is a territory, a republic. It's in the works of becoming a state, so to speak. But when it was being controlled by the Spanish, so on the east coast of the country, a lot of Freemasonry was influenced by the original American or British settlers that came and they brought Freemasonry. Who brought Masonry to California? How did it get there?
And that's kind of a conundrum, because obviously Mexico had Masonry during this period. But from what I've been able to gather, the California culture was very strict in its Catholicism and very uninterested in what the Americans were doing. Although that there were American sympathizers such as Vallejo, who didn't like what was happening with the Mexican government and felt that it would be better run by the Americans. But that doesn't mean that they would take everything wholesale. They have their own culture. And so there was a general disinterest with it. That's why it makes it so difficult, I think, to find out which Californios had joined these early lodges. I don't think that they joined in large droves, because the interest just wasn't there. It was an American thing, right? Usually Anglo-American thing, usually Protestant thing. Although there were other ethnic groups that did join Freemasonry. We had a large French population in California at one point, and several of them were able to form a lodge here in San Francisco, and then later on down in Los Angeles.
Where were the early lodges in California?
Primarily in the Mother Lode and in San Francisco, and also down on the peninsula in South Bay. So, San Jose number 10, that's a very low number. San Diego 35, that's all the way down there. But San Diego was a mission town. It was also a port. You had Los Angeles 42. That's, early. And mind you, these two cities, San Diego and Los Angeles, are nothing. Were nothing like they are today, right? San Francisco arguably was one of the larger metropolises at that time. And even San Francisco was sort of ramshackle for a long time until the gold rush. And then when 100,000 people poured in, one of the largest human migrations during peacetime.
An estimated 300,000 people moved to California during the gold rush, which was like a 2,000 increase in the state's population. And it's like a town of 1,000 growing to 20,000 people in just 3 to 4 years. Like, the space wasn't an issue. There was plenty of space for these people, but there was no homes. There were no places for them to live.
Oh, it's the stuff of novels and movies, right? And understand that up in Alta California and Upper California and Northern California, there's not a lot of people up here. So there's not a lot of infrastructure. That, of course, led to some of the prejudice the Americans had against the Californios, because they lived in adobe houses. They're rancheros, vaqueros. They're interested in leather work and herding cattle, and that's where their riches are, right? So they might live in simple houses, but the men are dressed, all of them are dressed up very fancily for their festivals, etc. And it just was a clash of cultures, for the American and the California. the Mexican government is overwhelmed. A lot of bad people come in with that. And so there's sort of a jockeying for power. And what are you going to do with the sick people coming in, and then the women and children that are coming in that are, you need to take care of them. The men are usually something else, have to be dealt with in their own way, and then you have to deal with the women and children. I don't want to overblow it, but you could consider it a humanitarian crisis in some areas, given the violence of the gold fields. San Francisco is a booming port. Lots of young men jumping off ships and wanting to get right out there. You have also a need for a sort of secular moral force, right? And this is where fraternal organizations come in. Not just Freemasonry, but temperance societies. There were Mormons coming into this during this time as well. So there's a great Mormon history in California. But with Freemasonry and the other fraternal organizations, such as the Odd Fellows, so the Odd Fellows and in Freemasonry are sort of exist in tandem in California. And indeed, if you go out into the gold country, you'll find, for lack of a better word, fraternal halls, because they're owned by both. Benjamin Hyam, our third Grand Master, talked about the roar of the forest beast and the steps of the red man. This kind of romantic, forest primeval. It also brings some of the best minds of that community together. So these are usually people of means, or down to what today we would call the middle class. And I remember looking in the records of Columbia Lodge where they talked about a lodge festival they had, and the brethren met at one of the taverns that was owned by a lodge member. And the ladies met in the collation room of the lodge hall, and then they sponsored a picnic for the miners in the orchard. And it's not uncommon to hear of I remember reading a founder of Benicia Lodge number 5, which is in Benicia, California. It's over, it's in the Bay Area. His brother had been murdered up in the gold fields, basically over a flask of whiskey, and stabbed to death with a buck knife in a tent. That kind of, and he had gone there to scope out opening up a store. This violence, I don't want to dwell too much on the violence, because it's not that it's morbid, but it gives the wrong impression of California. But back to the Masonry, I think that the most important point is the fraternal organization, and especially Freemasonry, which is the big granddaddy, were centers of community that brought home away from home. And that's something that has always enamored me about Freemasonry, is how you can meet somebody from far away, someone you may have never met. And in fact, within our rituals, we talk about that fact that you can meet people from far away and you find fraternity amongst them. We have a shared value from whatever our disparate and diverse backgrounds. It's Freemasonry that provides the glue where we can meet together. And I can imagine that this was so important in a land that has been, is new to you. It could be a frontier where you're not understood, you have nobody to reach out to, and there is your lodge brother. And also relief. Many of the lodges in the Gold Rush and thereafter provided relief during the various epidemics. Cholera is one of them. Also, that sort of that idea of that progressive idea of laying down the foundations of society, and understand the society that they're laying down is exactly what they experienced back east. The style of architecture that characterizes San Francisco as a Victorian city comes from New York and Boston.
The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. Bricks Masons has launched a new Masonic rings collection featuring designs from Blue Lodges all across our pendant bodies. You can transform your style and turn some really cool heads with the latest Masonic ring collection at BricksMasons.com. These are crafted from premium materials materials like stainless steel, titanium, and copper, and their rings are different color finishes with very exquisite detailing. It's a wide variety, too, of designs, colors, sizes. It makes finding the perfect Masonic ring effortless. Get yours and showcase your Masonic pride at bricksmasons.com. Visit bricksmasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order. Brothers, do you remember how you felt when you were first called to Freemasonry? The excitement of each degree? If you can still feel that call of the East, you're encouraged to apply to join the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction. The Scottish Rite offers Master Masons, like you, an opportunity to continue your Masonic journey and delve deeper into our craft through their 29 degrees. And there's an easy way to join the Scottish Rite. It's called Join the Rite Night, a virtual initiation where you can witness the requisite 4th degree and officially become a Scottish Rite Mason. There's 7 opportunities to join online from February 1st to April 25th. Here's what you do. Visit the Scottish Rite online at srnmj.us and click on the Join button. You can also join in person at a Scottish Rite reunion near you. Your journey to the 32nd degree in Freemasonry awaits. Take the first step at srnmj.us and click on the Join button today. So I want to talk about the unique history that California has. It becomes a state in 1850. In that same year, the Grand Lodge of California was established in Sacramento, which kind of surprised me. I thought it would have been in San Francisco, just based on the geography, but maybe you can shed some light on that. But can you also talk to us about like prominent Freemasons that were key contributors to the formation of the California Grand Lodge?
Let me get this straight. There was New Jersey Lodge under UD, under dispensation. There was Connecticut Lodge. New Jersey and Connecticut were both in Sacramento. Then you had Benton City Lodge, which became quickly known as Western Star. That was chartered by Missouri, by Peter Lassen and Satchel Woods. Benicia, which I will get into that because that's my primary focus right now. And California Lodge number 13, which was chartered by B.B. French out of Washington, D.C. I've spoken to Chris Rulli about this, and we've talked about the motivations that French and others, French was a man who's larger than life. All these people I'm going to be talking about or mention, I like to say that they're people that only the 19th century could produce. Eccentric hardiness. They take bullets and still enjoy odd literature and art and just have these odd ways about them and the ways of speaking. I enjoy their humor. They've discovered gold in California. This accelerates California's admission into the Union, of course. It accelerates the need for the empire of the sea to shining sea. To charter lodges there is to kind of put your thumbprint on it. Everybody's going out there, let's get a piece of it, right? California becomes a state in September of 1850. So this is before statehood, before admittance day. The Masons have formed their own government by themselves before California has done that. Now, some of the people that were there were also part of the California Constitutional Convention. Some of them were some of the founding members of the lodges, like Robert Semple, who I mentioned before. He was a member, an early member of Benicia Lodge, but also the president of the California Constitutional Convention. He also published the first newspaper in California. He was a politician. He was there for the Bear Flag Revolt. So these guys got around. I'm reminded of a sort of a travel book, but it's by Boston Commandery, and they put together a travel log of their journey west during the 1883 Knights Templar Triennial, and they built, I think, 6 or 7 Pullman cars to take them and their wives out. At this time, the Knights Templar is quite a very wealthy branch of the Masonic fraternity, right? They go through the American Southwest and they bring their cameras and take pictures of Navajos and Apaches and buy beads and eat fry bread and then are feted by some of the locals. And it's just kind of like, wow, this is the American Southwest. And then they make it into Los Angeles, and one of the comments is this air that's pungent with oranges because of the orange grove of Los Angeles and the torrential Los Angeles River. And those of you who've ever seen the Los Angeles River will know that it's not torrential.
No, and the pungent smell now is car pollution.
Exactly, exactly. And these are kind of fun things to think about. But what a strange world! So you have these the people of the East are taking notice of the people of the West, and they're the exact same people, but it's almost like they've gone from, Baghdad to Andalusia and discovered this grand empire of the West, right? And that's sort of romantic. And they're, this commander takes a train to LA, and then they change trains. They party for 3 or 4 days in Los Angeles, and of course, the commander is there, have a good, greet them, and they have a great feast, and all is good. And then they take a train up north, and they stop, and they're met by brothers, and they feast. And then they make it up to Oakland, and they're feted, and governor and the mayor come out, and then the California commandery of San Francisco comes, and they take a ferry over, and then that's where the big to-do is. And there's a very famous lithograph of the 1883 triennial of the Knights Templar marching up Market Street with the triumphal arches, and which were made out of paper mache, by the way. They're laying wreaths at statues of Masonic presidents. The Grand Chapter of Royal Archmasons has a parade in Golden Gate Park carrying a gold-plated Ark of the Covenant. This is the high point of fraternity. And also think about this: it's an economy too. California had gone through a recession, and this was a way to build up some economic force, right? And we don't really think of fraternal organizations as having any impact on the economy, but I will dare say by this time, the fraternal organizations were where you went to wheel and deal, where you went to meet people, to be somebody. And for a short time, even if you weren't a politician, to be somebody you weren't. You could be a middle manager or an accountant, and in the evening you are expressing your inner self by being a high priest. Or I was looking on Instagram, and there was an ad for the Odd Fellows, and they called themselves the original social media, and it's very clever, and it's true. This was the original social media, and it's something that was expected of certain men at that time. So when we think about, well, why was that guy a Mason? And it's certainly not because he was a closet Kabbalist. I'm not criticizing that, because there are people that are interested in the world beyond. But for many, it's something you did, and your father did it. But it's not just because it's family and it's because of, wheeling and dealing. These connections are important, especially if you can trust somebody, that trust from the heart. And then there are the other sides of it. And there are also ways for immigrant populations to integrate into society. This is certainly one of the avenues the Jewish community in San Francisco took. Many of them from Germany and Western Europe. I mentioned that teaser with Benicia Lodge. Benicia Lodge had issues during the formation of the California Grand Lodge because they had been chartered by the Grand Lodge of Ancient York Masons of Louisiana. That's not the Grand Lodge of Louisiana. This was another Grand Lodge that had been formed by Mississippi Masons residing in Louisiana, and sort of, to make a long story short, supplanted what normally would have been more of a French influence in Louisiana. Now, I recommend reading the works from Michael Pohl, who will get into this conflict between the two Grand Lodges. But this plays out in California by the chartering or the warranting of Pacific Lodge at Benicia. Now, originally they were to meet anywhere they could, but they ended up at Benicia through the efforts of Benjamin Daniel Hyam, L.A. Besançon, and their friendship with Robert Semple, who had also, from all accounts, had become a Mason in Davy Crockett Lodge in San Francisco, which had already been also been chartered by this Ancient York Masons Grand Lodge. So their attempts to form a Grand Lodge, so I mentioned that earlier attempt in March, Hyam was a part of that. Was this an attempt to kind of legitimize the Ancient York Mason Grand Lodge? And to kind of also set Chaim up as the leader of that, it's a distinct possibility. Now, at that time, they didn't realize that the two Grand Lodges, the Louisiana Grand Lodge and the Grand Lodge of Louisiana and the Ancient York Masons, would eventually merge together, but it would be far different than what they were before. And the Ancient York Masons effectively took over, right? It was a totally different type of Grand Lodge at this point. Benicia Lodge, despite Chaim not really making a very good impression on producing his papers, they basically were allowed into that convention and basically regularized right there, probably out of convenience, because when that amalgamation or that merger happened, they would have had to do all this rechartering. This is what has been suspected, not just by me, but by others writing on it. It would have been a very difficult process. Benicia Lodge becomes regularized. Chaim is a very controversial individual in his own right. That's its own talk. And he creates a situation in California in 1852. He's forced to vacate his position as Grand Master. Is that kicking out? He certainly wanted to stay, but they had the Deputy Grand Master for his abuses of power, as it was determined. The Deputy Grand Master took over the duties and for 2 months, but he retained his past Grand Master title. He led committees, etc. What he had done was he made at least 3 Masons at sight. These had been men who had been rejected from from the lodge, so that made them mad. But there had been, to Chaim's credit, there had been injustices against these men. He was sort of in the right, but was he? Well, he was one man against one lodge, really, because one of the people that he had made a Mason at sight had been rejected by, and that was California Lodge number 13, which became number 1 in 1850. Had very powerful individuals, not the least of whom was the Grand Master, Jonathan Drake Stevenson, who was a New Yorker. He had been in government in New York, and he had been commissioned to take a regiment from New York. It was the New York Volunteers, to come to California during the Mexican-American War. He had a very distinguished career in the military here. He did try his hand at mining. He got a little bit, and he also owned a lot of real estate. He was born in 1900 and died in 1800 and died in 1898. So he was old. And every painting or illustration you see of him, he's very old. He was in his middle age when he came to California.
98 now is long. Then it must have been like living to being 200, like with all of the issues that you had with health and just lack of medical access. Oh my gosh. I've learned so much, and thank you so much for sharing the history of California with me and our listener, and really kind of understanding what, westward expansion meant with the idea of manifest destiny, which was really a big driver. I'll leave you with this question, Adam. Looking back on the history of California and your Grand Lodge, what do you feel is the most significant contribution that California Freemasons have made to Freemasonry, our ancient and gentle craft in general?
Well, that's a great question. One thing that we're very proud of is the public school system in California, and Masons had been at the forefront. John Swett, who is considered the father of public schools in California, was a Mason. In fact, he was a member of my lodge. That sort of social justice, and I consider public schools to be a form of social justice, is one of the few sort of kind of political or areas that get into politics that Masons are able to kind of rally behind in California. One of the other people I wanted to talk about was the great orator, Thomas Starr King from Boston originally. And he came out here, and he's credited with saving California for the Union. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but he was the silver-tongued orator. He was also a Mason very briefly, and he died very young. He died at about age 40. Understood how to speak to people, and in an age where there's a lot of division. This is during the Civil War, And he could speak to people of a different class, even different color, and get into their heart. He could pick apart their arguments and win them over. And his overarching idea was a United States, a country united rather than divided. And he campaigned for Lincoln on the basis of this belief. He was a Unitarian minister on the basis that we are one people, and that belief in the goodness and the unity of the American people went a long way. And that's sort of a Freemasons can understand, is that unity of mankind and the ability to find a common ground in even in division of opinion, and being able to bring about a reformation, or to at least understand where they're coming from. That's what I'm most proud of, not only these two individuals, but the idea of public education and the understanding, that tolerance that has characterized California. But the programs we have here in California for the public school system, designed to uplift not just the children, but people in general, to educate people. I think that's the hallmark of any civil society, is being able to be educated. So many people have died to think for themselves, to know things, to understand their environs and their universe. And if that's what we stand for, then that's the best.
Brother Adam Kendall, our guest this week on the Craftsman Online podcast. Many thanks for giving us some time.
Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow the Craftsman Online podcast on Spotify or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.